In this video, I'd like to talk about the 5-paragraph essay, which is very often taught in high schools and sometimes still in university as well. It's a kind of cookie-cutter method to essay writing, and I think it's really problematic because it teaches students a kind of easy formula, and then they're stuck with this, and they often don't know how to break out of that formula or to experiment and move beyond it. So what I'd like to do then is first of all explain what a 5-paragraph essay is, then we'll talk a little bit about some of the problems with it, and then in a separate video I'll talk about how you can move beyond it and write more organically. Now, a 5-paragraph essay is not just an essay that has 5 paragraphs, if only it were that easy. It's instead a whole series of rules that are associated with this kind of structure. And I'll first go through some of these rules and the kinds of things that are typically taught in high school, and then we'll look at some problems as mentioned. So a 5-paragraph essay then consists of an intro, 3 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. And the intro typically starts with what's referred to as a hook. Okay, so we start with a hook. And this can be anything that seems remotely interesting. So it could be a dictionary definition, a quotation, basically anything you can Google at 2 in the morning. There's obviously a problem with this already. You can see that you're trying to make your essay attractive and interesting without first worrying about your topic or your thesis. Instead, you're just trying to sound interesting, right? Which is a bit removed from the topic yet. So then we mentioned the topic. Okay, we have the topic next, and then we have the thesis. And that's sort of the structure of your intro. You zoom in towards your thesis. It doesn't seem to matter too much how far away you start from your thesis. As long as you say something general and eventually get to your thesis, everything is a-okay. Now, the thesis is supposed to consist of a number of things. It should be exactly 1 sentence long. So if you've got a lot to say, I guess you'll just have to cram it into 1 sentence. It should be the last sentence of your introduction. So the last sentence. And of course, in a longer essay, that gets problematic because you might have your thesis, after the 3rd or the 4th paragraph. But we're only being taught to write a very specific kind of essay. And then the last point, and probably the most problematic one, is that your thesis should state 3 arguments. So 3 arguments, 1 for every body paragraph. Okay, so very rigid, exactly 3. It's kind of like an old-fashioned sermon, right? You have to have 3 points to a sermon. All right, then we have our first body paragraph. And here we simply start by announcing topic 1. Because we've mentioned that we have 3 arguments. So here's the first one, topic 1. This is also called your topic sentence, the first sentence of your paragraph, and it very broadly summarizes what you're going to talk about. Some of this is good, of course, and we'll come back to this in the next movie where we talk about organic structure, because you do need a general sentence to kind of say what you're going to talk about. But you can see that this is quite rigid so far. Then we kind of zoom into some examples or facts, and then we conclude. And we sort of repeat what was in our topic sentence. Very repetitive essay. Now, a lot of people compare this kind of paragraph structure to an hourglass because you're zooming in. Okay, you're zooming in, then you zoom out at the end. Another comparison that's sometimes made is to a hamburger. So here's a hamburger. Give it 1 patty. And you can see that the patty is kind of the meat of the paragraph. What's, is going to give you the most energy, I guess. So those are some analogies for paragraph writing, and they're not bad ones. But as we see, as we go through this, each paragraph is going to have a very similar structure then. So paragraph 2 is simply topic number 2. Then we have topic number 3. And the same structure keeps repeating itself. Announce your topic, give some examples or facts, and conclude. Then we get to the conclusion, and the conclusion allows you simply to repeat everything you've said. So most students are being taught, well, just repeat what you've said, go back to your thesis, use a few different words so it's not quite so repetitive. And then if you want to be more interesting, then maybe you can teach some moral lesson or some kind of application or add another quote, right? Very artificial, but just stick some stuff in there. And that is a 5-paragraph essay. And you can see that once you learn this model, you can just crank out essay after essay. It's not that hard, actually. Just come up with a topic or a subject, and then provide 3 topics or arguments and conclude at the end. Once you master the model, it shouldn't be too difficult. What is good about this and what is bad? Well, let's go through this. First of all, what's good is that we have a really clear sense of structure. And even when you write more organically, which is what we're going to teach you after this, you still need to have a sense of kind of internal structure. Your paragraphs have to zoom in more. They have to announce what's coming up. You have to have a thesis, right? All of these things are good. But the 5-paragraph model just does it too rigidly. And so what's bad about this is the rigidity. Too rigid, always following exactly the same pattern. Another thing that's problematic about this is, why do we have 3 points? Why do we have to have exactly 3 points? What an arbitrary number. It's like if somebody teaches you baking and gives you only recipes with 3 ingredients, right? It's really ridiculous. What would happen, for instance, if your essay was a longer one in a senior course, let's say, and was 20 pages long? Would each paragraph start to stretch, as much as possible? We know that a paragraph is typically 3 to 12 sentences, something like that, and really shouldn't go over a page too often. So there's a problem with this then. How do you break up these points once they get too big? Another question to ask is, how are these points connected? What's the relationship between them? Because what tends to happen is that you have your thesis, right? There's your thesis, and then you have 3 points. So 3 points, and they all have some bearing on the thesis. They're sort of related back to the main point, but they have nothing to do with each other. There's no internal connections. And that's why when you get to a new point in your paper, right? So if we kind of go up here, you move from point 2 to point 3, let's say. There's no transition. There's very little in terms of a transition. And often what students do is they simply say, well, and here is another point. Also, we will also see that we're going to talk about this. But what's the connection between points 2 and 3? There's absolutely no connection. The only connection is that they both go back to the same thesis. But that's pretty weak. So the point then is these 3 points are not really being connected. There are no strong transitions. And you might actually say that there's no flow then. The essay simply doesn't flow. It's very choppy. It's here's a point, here's another point, and so on. In a proper essay, you should think of your paragraphs as building blocks. So you start with something that maybe we can all agree with, that is a bit more easy, that's easier to kind of understand. And then your second paragraph is not placed beside it as some kind of separate point, but is placed on top of it, like you're stacking. And then your third paragraph, and so on. And you're building a tower. And the idea is that if you climb on top of the tower, you can see much further, right? You're developing a point instead of having a bunch of different points. So that's a fundamental flaw with the 5-paragraph essay, is that it doesn't connect points and it doesn't have flow. The other problem is that it's too repetitive. It's very repetitive. Just like I repeated myself there. Now, if you look at this, just have a look at where the same thesis gets repeated. Okay, so if we just apply a little bit of color here, we're going to have our thesis. Then we're going to make sure that we harken back to our thesis in the topic sentence. But then we also conclude at the end. So we're going to make sure that our reader really understands what's at stake. Here we go again, right? We just keep on repeating. And then the conclusion is all repetition all the time. In a short essay, that's extremely repetitive, and the reader is not, is not unintelligent, for lack of a more pejorative word. The reader knows what you're talking about. So why do so much repeating? And I think that's something that we have to work on to really avoid this issue. Another issue is that because of all the repetition, and because we have 3 separate points, we don't zoom in enough. Don't zoom in enough, right? Because how much time is there left for zooming in? As soon as we finish a point, we start with something different, and then we don't have time to develop that. So everything is general, everything gets repeated. There's just no detail to this kind of paper. Instead, what we want to do is we want to really dig in, right, where we have this model of stacking or building on top of other ideas. And you can see this problem with zooming in also with the hook, with the introduction. Because you have this artificial hook, you're not starting with your topic specifically, but you're starting with something else that might sound interesting. And so what you end up with is this introduction that's so broad, that has all of these different layers before you get to your actual thesis, that you might as well be starting in outer space before you're kind of zooming in. And we really want this triangle to be much narrower and much quicker. So that's another problem then with the kind of structure that we have here. What we end up with then, just to summarize, is a 5-paragraph essay that's really 3 mini essays that are loosely connected. And we want to start moving beyond that. We want to write more organically. We want to have an essay that has just 1 thesis, 1 argument, not 3. We want to have flow to our essay. We want to develop our ideas in greater depth. And we'll talk about how to do this in a separate video.